And last but not least, I'm going to first of all commend Ben Weisner's biography in our program so that I don't have to read it all and take more time because we want to hear what Ben has to say. But before I do that, I would say that I have had the pleasure of co-counseling 2 cases with Ben Weisner post 9/11. One was an airline profiling case. The other was a no-fly list case. And we won because of him. One thing that I don't think Ben might recall is that it's because of him that I had my first trip to Hawaii several years ago, and I'll be very grateful to him for that forever. But it's my honor to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Ben Weisner.
Oh boy, couldn't I have gone first tonight? First I want to thank Reggie, and I want to say to him in front of all of you that Reggie really was one of my first mentors at the ACLU. When I came to the ACLU in August of 2001, he was a great friend to me. He supervised me on those cases that we're talking about, and Reggie was one of the people in the national office who brought me from the Southern California affiliate in 2004 to the national office to help start what became our national security project. And it's so gratifying for me to see the unbelievable leadership that Reggie is giving to this affiliate right now. So thank you. I want to congratulate the honorees. I go to a lot of these events. I've never been to one like this one, where I was choked up and wiping away tears for most of the night. You know, the affiliates at the ACLU are really the frontline civil liberties defenders. So I want to say to my colleagues in the ACLU of Pennsylvania that you know, we're in awe of what you do. We love all of the ACLU affiliates equally, of course, but we love some of them more equally than others. When litigators talk about forum shopping, they usually talk about going to places where the courts are more favorable. But when we talk about forum shopping at the ACLU National Office, we talk about going to where we get to litigate with our favorite colleagues, and it's no coincidence that we litigate a lot of cases here in Pennsylvania. I want to say something else about Pennsylvania. Are John and Bonnie Raines here? I don't think they are here tonight, but I know that they've been honored here. I've been thinking a lot about them. As many of you know, in 1971, just about 20 miles from here in Media, Pennsylvania, a bunch of activists who included John and Bonnie Raines and Bill Davidon, who was a longtime board member of this affiliate, broke in to an FBI field office and stole all of the files, and then mailed many of them to the Washington Post, and initiated a series of events that led to the first period of energetic democratic oversight over the intelligence community in the United States. It would not have happened but for that courageous act. And I've been thinking about them a lot this year, about the so-called media burglars, in the course of my representation of Edward Snowden. In fact, I was able to bring a copy of a book about the media burglars that was signed by all of them to Edward Snowden in Russia and deliver it to him, and he was grateful. And the reason for that is that the parallels are very hard to ignore. As I said, that was the first period of energetic democratic oversight that we had. And the second one is the one that we're experiencing right now as a result of the Snowden revelations. Both of those periods of oversight were initiated by dramatic acts of law-breaking. And perhaps it's an irony in our system that we need people sometimes to go outside the rules in order to vindicate the rules, in order to get our overseers to do what they're supposed to do. Now, if we were going to try to sum up what we've learned in the last year or so from the Snowden revelations in a single sentence, it might be something like this. Surveillance technologies have outpaced democratic controls. But even before the Snowden revelations, we could see that these new technologies were fundamentally changing our lives It used to be possible for us to live lives of practical obscurity. What I mean by that is that most of our activities were unobserved, except by the people immediately around us. Consider now how technology has changed that. Think about something like the telephone. Many people in this room will remember when it used to be attached to a cord that was attached to a wall. Some of you might even have gone into phone booths and closed the door. Last year, the New York Times published a very smart article and said, maybe we should stop using the word phone. The phone is the least of what this thing is. Maybe we should use the word tracker. Because this little police office in your pocket is connecting at every second to cell towers, broadcasting its precise location, some of them connecting to satellites. And your location, by the way, says a lot about you. In the words of one federal court, GPS data can reveal whether you're a weekly churchgoer, a heavy drinker, a regular at the gym, an unfaithful husband, an outpatient receiving medical treatment, an associate of particular individuals or political groups, and not just one fact about you, but all of those facts. And this kind of data, which never existed before, is extremely useful to law enforcement. They make millions of requests a year to cell phone companies in order to get this information. This phone is also a little computer in your pocket. It stores your communications, it stores your photos, your sensitive data, might even connect to your banking and medical records. Think about how we used to send mail to each other, when people used to actually write notes on paper and lick envelopes and put a stamp. Now we live in a world where nothing is deleted, everything is stored in a digital cloud, and may come back to haunt us in ways that we might not have anticipated. Consider Professor David Petraeus of the City University of New York. He was under no suspicion of wrongdoing whatsoever. One woman wrote a nasty anonymous email to a second woman, and the next week the FBI was pouring through thousands of David Petraeus, then the CIA director's, personal emails, and he lost his job. Shopping. We used to browse in bookstores. Imagine if when you shopped in a store, someone followed you around, taking notes the entire time, not just of what you bought, but what you looked at. You would call the police. But the internet equivalent obviously draws yawns. And we could go down the list, driving, taking photos, even your kitchen appliances will soon be tracking your behavior. And all of this is compounded by how cheap surveillance and storage have become. It used to be very expensive to store all this information. One technical statistic, just 30 years ago, it cost $100,000 to store a gigabyte of data. Now it's less than 10 cents, which is basically free. And so what that means is that for the first time in human history, it's technologically and financially feasible for governments and corporations to record and store all of the information about all of the activities in our lives. This is an important point because I don't think that our principal privacy protection in the past was law. I think it was cost. If the police wanted to know where you were, they might have to assign teams of agents to follow you around. Now, one police officer at a laptop can follow all of you in real time over months, not just on one trip. And what has happened because of this incredible revolution in surveillance technology and plunging costs of storage is that governments and corporations have tracked and retained this information simply because they can. The slogan at the NSA under General Keith Alexander was, collect it all. The authorities will follow. Collect it all. And it's not just, as you know, governments that are doing this. It's also corporations. They're mining this information to learn as much as they can about you, sometimes before you know it yourself. Many of you will have read an article in the New York Times a couple of years ago about Target. Target, the company, wanted to know when its customers were pregnant. And it wanted to know that because it's very valuable information. It's one of the few periods in our lives when we can change our shopping habits. They wanted to draw people in, and people who might not know that Target sells diapers in bulk, orange juice. And so they assigned this as a math problem to the mathematicians on their staff, and it turned out to be not a very difficult problem. It turned out that certain combinations of products that people buy are suggestive of pregnancy: unscented lotions, cotton balls. And so Target started to send targeted advertisements to customers advertising products that would be of interest. and they got an outraged phone call from a parent of a 16-year-old girl who said, "Why are you sending this stuff to my daughter?" And he called back a few weeks later and said, "I need to apologize. I didn't know everything that was going on in my own home." And Target learned something from this, not that they shouldn't send those kinds of advertisements, but that they should conceal them better. And they should not let you know what they know, but maybe put the diapers next to a lawnmower so that you would think that it was a random advertisement. This seems amusing and perhaps even harmless, but you can be sure that companies like Target and much less reputable data brokers know your mental health status, they know your sexual orientation, they know other kinds of very, very sensitive information. Does it make people here uncomfortable that companies, and of course governments, know and are selling to others the fact that you may be depressed, you may be overweight, gay? I think a lot of people would be shocked to know how much of this information is traded back and forth with their consent, by the way, by hundreds of companies that are trying to turn it into dollars. And I want to be clear now that this is not an anti-technology polemic. All of the technologies that we're discussing have tremendously beneficial uses. This little police officer in your pocket, this little tracker, is enormously useful directions for traffic. I like Easy Pass, so I don't have to wait in a long line to hand cash and get change. You know, online shopping is a huge convenience. Even Facebook, has there ever been a more efficient way to compel me to look at my friends' baby photos? And I would even say a technology like drones, which has a very sinister connotation in a room like this because of the use they've been put to, could be put to very good use. Imagine if Human Rights Watch had drones that it could fly over war zones in countries where the press has a hard time getting to, so we could document atrocities. So these technologies are all here to stay. There's no meaningful way to opt out. I'm not asking people to build cabins in the woods. But there are good uses and bad uses that are associated with any technology. The question is, how do we create a system where we can enjoy the good uses without suffering from the bad ones? The answer, of course, is that we're going to need laws that protect our values in the face of these new technologies. And the bad news is that our laws so far have done a very bad job of keeping pace with technological change. Unlike every other Western democracy, we have no basic privacy law in the United States that governs the kind of data that companies can collect, the type of transparency or choice that they have to offer us as consumers, or how these companies can use or can't use the very sensitive data that they collect. And the primary statute that governs the government's use or access to this data was enacted in 1986, before there was even a World Wide Web. And the Fourth Amendment, which obviously was written before GPS, also, for the most part, has not kept pace, although there are some encouraging signs. The Supreme Court in the 1970s enunciated a doctrine that's come under a lot of criticism lately called the third-party doctrine, which essentially holds that information that we voluntarily divulge to anyone else no longer enjoys constitutional protection. And think about what that would mean in an age of universal cloud storage. If you store documents or personal records, if you have a diary that you handwrite and store on a desk, the police absolutely need a warrant before they get access to it. But if you save it as a Google document and you store it in the cloud, under this doctrine it would enjoy no constitutional protection. Every time we make a phone call, we are voluntarily sharing that phone number with a phone company. In the 1970s, the Supreme Court said that meant that we didn't have constitutional protection over who we call on the phone. The NSA has used that ruling in order to demand every call record from every American and to store it for 5 years at a time. And remember that metadata, this is what it's called, not the content of the phone call, but who we call, can be extremely revealing. Consider metadata from a series of phone calls in one evening. If a woman called her gynecologist, then called her mother, then called a man that she had regularly spoken to after 11 p.m., and then called a family planning center, you would not need a wiretap to know what was going on those phone calls. Now there are, as I said a minute ago, some promising developments here. In 2012, the Supreme Court held for the first time that long-term GPS tracking of our location. Putting a GPS device on a car was a search under the Fourth Amendment, and many people know that the Supreme Court held this year in a unanimous decision that if the police want to search one of these when they arrest you, they need to get a warrant in order to do that. So there are some promising developments, but the law in general has fallen way behind the technology. Why should we care? Why should we care about this? And what many of you will have heard from friends, colleagues, or relatives, perhaps there's someone in this room who's even uttered this sentence, is, I've done nothing wrong. I have nothing to hide. If the government needs to do these things in order to fight terrorists, that's fine. It has nothing to do with me. And so what I want to suggest is that that formulation that you hear so often is the wrong answer to the wrong question. It's the wrong answer because all of us, in fact, have a lot to hide. And it's the wrong question because privacy is not fundamentally about secrecy versus disclosure. It's fundamentally about context and control and power. So what do I mean when I say that everyone here has plenty to hide? Let's start with the obvious. Many of you probably close the door when you take a shower. I doubt you would post your credit card statements to your Facebook page. You probably would not give me your email passwords. As the security expert Bruce Schneier put it very well, we do nothing wrong when we make love or go to the bathroom. We are not deliberately hiding anything when we seek out private places for reflection or conversation. We keep private journals, sing in the privacy of the shower, and write letters to secret lovers and burn them. Privacy is a basic human need. I think that's exactly right. People hide many things from even their closest friends. That they're gay, that they're sick, that they're pregnant, that they're in love with someone else. There's a reason we call it a private life. Now, I am a professional civil libertarian. I obviously don't think there's anything wrong with viewing pornography or buying sex toys or picking my nose. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to hide those activities from most people. Privacy is not about concealing vice. Secrecy, I think, would be a better word for that. It's about the human need for refuge from the eyes of the community and from the constant monitoring that living with other people entails. It's about the need for space in which to play, to try out new ideas, new identities, behaviors without permanent consequences. The debate about privacy, I think, is too often presented in either-or terms. Either we've chosen to keep something a secret, or we've decided to reveal it to the world. But so much of our lives falls between those two poles. And this is what I meant a moment ago when I said context and control. People might speak very loudly on their cell phones with little regard for whether they're overheard by people around them. But we're still appalled when tabloid reporters hack into those phones, not only because the hacking is criminal, but because the individuals have been violated in a profound way. I want to also suggest tonight that privacy may be too small a word for the concerns that we have about a world of universal tracking and mass surveillance. Imagine what it will be like to live in a world where literally all of our behavior is seen, a world in which drones fly over our cities with Argus cameras that record every square inch of public place at all times. Imagine what it would feel like to get a letter once a week or once a month from the local authorities detailing all of the many violations of the law that you had committed, the times and places where you had sped, not stopped at a stop sign, put your recycling into the garbage. Now, in each of those instances, you have violated a rule that the public, through an election, has decided to impose. Nonetheless, you don't really want to live in a world where every single minor infraction, everything that you do, every hand you hold, is observed and recorded. This will really create a different sense of what it means to be a person. We also need to be concerned about what civil libertarians call mission creep. Never in the history of government have these kinds of powers been amassed and not abused. Information that is collected today in the name of fighting terrorism is going to be used tomorrow in all kinds of other ways. That's particularly the case because collecting every bit of information, building the world's largest haystack, is not a very good way of finding a needle. It doesn't actually help us with terrorism. On the other hand, it is an extremely effective forensic surveillance time machine. If governments have the ability to hit rewind on everything that happened everywhere, they are going to know, so much more about who we are and what we do. And these powers will not stay with the NSA in Fort Meade in Maryland. They will, be with your local joint terrorism task forces and eventually with your local police who have access to this information through their handheld devices. That country will be a very different one. And we need to remember that the framers of our Constitution were more worried about a government that had that kind of power than they were about bad guys occasionally getting away. Let me close with a little bit of optimism. I said before that we have inadequate privacy protections, and there are a few interesting exceptions to that in our law. One of them is that there is excellent privacy protection for video rentals. Do people remember video rentals? Do people remember going to the Blockbuster, walking around for 30 minutes, bickering with whoever you went there with, and then renting the wrong movie? In 1987, Robert Bork was nominated to the Supreme Court. The ACLU opposed that nomination. During the course of Bork's nomination, the Washington City paper went to Judge Bork's video store, obtained his rental records, and published them. There was nothing very racy in it. One of them, I think, was The Man Who Knew Too Much. To the ACLU's credit, we opposed what the Washington City paper did. We said it was no different than breaking into somebody's library and writing down a list of books. 535 members of Congress got very, very nervous and imagined what might happen if newspaper reporters got to see the movies that they were renting. Pretty soon thereafter, there were serious criminal penalties for anybody who divulged or published that kind of information. I mentioned before that the Supreme Court in 2012 for the first time held that GPS tracking was a search under the Fourth Amendment. During the oral argument in that case, Chief Justice Roberts asked the government's lawyer, are you saying that if the FBI went into the Supreme Court's garage and put GPS devices on the justices' cars and tracked our location over time, that that wouldn't be a search under the Fourth Amendment? And the government's lawyer said, respectfully, Chief Justice Roberts, that would be no different than our assigning teams of FBI officers to do the same thing. This was the wrong answer. And all 9 justices of the Supreme Court, for different reasons, held that the Constitution did have a role to play when the government undertook to track location over time. What do these stories have in common? What they have in common is that people in power, in a position to protect our privacy through the law, realized that they had skin in the game. And if you take one thing away from the extraordinary global debate that we've had over the last year, it's that all of us, in one way or another, have some skin in the game. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor to be here.